And here we go. How you guys doing? Got another homework assignment for you. Can you believe it? Yep, damn straight. So we're going to talk leadership, and I hope this works out well. I was kind of trying to think of a new homework assignment for this. I'll tell you the truth. One of the greatest challenges for me this semester has been to think of homework assignments to turn this into a meaningful virtual online experience. And I guess it's not so much thinking of, but it's the sheer number of homework assignments that had to be come up with that has taxed my creative abilities. And you may be saying, yeah, a lot of these assignments are bullshit. You got to go back to the drawing board. But notice that's why one of your options for extra credit is to think in terms of improving the assignments and explaining to me how to do that. So we do our best, right, and see where it goes. Let's talk leadership. And notice we're all the way at lecture 16. This would normally be the last, but there's been a method to this madness. Notice we put the team and the group decision making up front, so I think leadership belongs up front here as well. As when you're working on a team, we can begin to think in terms of what it means to be a leader on that team, if you will, or have multiple leaders on that team. So becoming a leader changes everything for you. At least it should. It should change your relationship with your people, it should change your relationship with yourself, and it should make you damn serious about contributing to the folks that work with you, the community in which your organization is embedded, and of course the organization. This is a tremendous opportunity to step outside the self and become something new, and that's what it's about leaders. So when you become a leader and it changes everything, it's about your performance, right? It's about setting an example. Not shooting your mouth off and telling everyone why you're so bitching. Let's be quiet and just think about setting an example, right? It's about the reactions that you demonstrate to others, but most importantly, the impact of those reactions on other people. It's about making real contributions, but more than that, it's about facilitating the space in which people can contribute their best. Right? And it's about people, and that was at the beginning of the course, and that's going to be at the end of the course, and it's going to be every day throughout the course. It's about the people. So success now, when you're a leader, is no longer about your personal success. It's about facilitating the success and the growth of others. So it does change everything. Leadership defined: influential instrument of goal achieved through others. That's what leadership is about. So there's goals that conform to a mission, constrained by a set of values, right? All those pieces fit together. It's about you becoming the instrument of progress and accomplishment through other people. So it's a process between leaders and followers. Remember, if you don't have followers, you can't be a leader. So followers are critical to a leader. Okay, it involves social influence and finding ways to get things done. It operates at multiple levels, so it can be at the individual level, the group level, or the organizational level, and it really focuses on goal accomplishment. Should be the ultimate litmus test, right? So what's the difference between leading versus managing? Well, we talked about McGregor and Theory X and Theory Y, and you might have started to get the idea that we were talking about managers and leaders to some extent. Leaders and leading has to be done from in front. So you lead and people follow, right? And unfortunately, we have an awful lot of people in the world in positions of power that don't understand that leadership is from in front. They try to stay behind and call the shots based on whichever way the wind's blowing. No, the leader steps forward and genuinely leads, supplies inspiration, supplies a vision, and chooses a strategy, right? Managing is critical as well, but it's a different set of skills. It's about planning, it's about investigating, it's about organizing, it's about control, right? So, just because someone is an excellent manager doesn't mean they're well qualified or well positioned to be a leader. Different skill sets. Now, some people have both. No two ways about it. Some people have neither. But a lot of people have one or the other, right? Good leaders, not necessarily good managers. Okay? So, leading versus managing. Management's about arranging and telling. Leadership is about nurturing and enhancing, right? Big difference there. And remember Tom Peters' 4 most important words? What do you think? Every leader should have that at the tip of their tongue. Now, when we look at leadership, and this is a big area for industrial organizational psychology, was the study of leadership. And as the study of leadership proceeded, people were all kind of trying to make the case that they had an understanding of what constitutes leadership. So some people took a trait approach and they said, good leaders possess these traits, poor leaders possess other traits or lack the traits of good leaders. Some people talk about leadership in terms of behavioral contingencies and the management of contingencies. So you think about B.F. Skinner in that case. Contingency management talks about the nature and reacting to an environmental circumstance. Right? Transformational leadership really studied about people who come in and transform organizations, make them more than they were or different than they were. And then emerging leadership will handle as the final aspect. And there's a couple different ways to look at emergent leadership. One of my favorite things in operating process improvement teams was one of the things we did with process improvement teams is as we move through and we're into like week 4 of weekly meetings, we say, who is our emergent leader? There's someone in this group that's likely to emerge as the leader. How do I create the space for them to emerge and then grow their leadership qualities, right, and grow their leadership skills? And that's a contribution. That's paying it forward to the next set of teams, so to speak, right? So, trade approaches then. Let's knock this first one out. Stodule man all the way back to 49. What are we looking at? Well, what constitutes a good leader? Is it intelligence? Is it dominance? Is it self-confidence? Is it the level of energy? Is it task-relevant knowledge? Of these potential traits or qualities, intelligence was the best predictor, but no common trait profile was demonstrated. And what we're going to find is that trait approaches to leadership, that is, if we want to hire a leader, let's say, and then we decide these are the traits of a leader, and now let's test our candidates for their conformance to these traits, and hire the most conforming is probably not going to yield results that we want. Traits are good partial explanations, but rarely the core of successful hiring. So, characteristics of leaders versus managers. What do we know? Leaders, and look at these terms that are being displayed here: motivating, influencing, changing behavior, calling on people to do things differently. Right? Tend to be charismatic. People want to be around them. People want to listen to them. They're capable of setting the tone of an organization, stating what that tone should be, and then moving people towards that. Leaders tend to act decisively, right? That they're capable of doing this. Leaders put people first, right? And they choose the right goal, not lead people down a path to ruin and or disaster. Now, managers should be good at practicing stewardship, managing resources efficiently and effectively. They should be the bomb at executing plans. Managers need to be conscientious and detail-oriented, right? And notice there is a trait, conscientiousness, in the big 5 personality traits that might then tie to that, right? They tend to be responsible, and managers will take responsibility. Right? If someone says, I'm not responsible, they're neither a leader nor a manager at that point, right? Customers first. Good manager puts customers first, and they view their people as a resource. And finally, they're willing to be held accountable, and they hold themselves accountable, and they're willing to hold their people accountable. Right? So the leadership prototype or archetype, if we want to get Jungian about this, right? Because Jung talks about archetypes, and notice, right? Have you guys done your Myers-Briggs score? Everyone know their Myers-Briggs score? That is actually the Jungian typology, right? It came from Jung. And if you're an ENTJ, right, that's called the field marshal or the executive. That is like the classic leadership profile. Right? So that would be the prototype. And notice that's a lot where Jung comes from, is kind of archetypical thinking. It's this mental representation of what it is to be and what it means to be a leader. And the archetype that we possess, or we probably share, And notice this is an ancient archetype, so it needs some updating, if you will. But usually intelligence, masculinity, and dominance are the components that comprise this archetype. And there's no cultural difference observed in this. This is usually kind of accepted throughout, and no real global prototype necessarily. So take it with a grain of salt, as we will this whole section on the trait and characteristic approaches. Okay. Leadership, admiration, and credibility. Okay. Honesty, forward-looking, inspiring, competent. Right? These appear to be more culturally universal. So while these others don't seem to be consistent across cultures, these in fact do seem to be more consistent. So these are maybe things that we would more look at. Now, what about emotional intelligence? Fascinating idea that in fact cognitive intelligence is not as good a predictor of leadership skill and quality than is emotional intelligence. In fact, emotional intelligence is turning in the workplace to be one of the best predictors of advancement, if you will. Right? So what is emotional intelligence? Well, first is the ability to manage oneself, and that is one's own emotional displays and emotional reactions. But it's also the ability to manage emotions within relationships. So the components, self-awareness and self-management, sure, but social competence and relationship management. And maybe, you know, if you have to have a tough interview, if you have to have, let's say, a tough performance feedback with someone, a session with someone, then what does this comprise? Well, it's presenting the information in a way that doesn't get the person's back up, if you will, right? Instead of just saying, well, I'm gonna tell it like it is, and they're gonna react however the hell they want to react, and that's really not my responsibility or my business. Notice, failure number one, not taking responsibility. It's like, how can I give this person this performance feedback that is largely negative, but in a way that doesn't offend or hurt them or cause them to get angry? And that's part of the skill of emotional intelligence. And maybe some people are saying right now, well, I don't give a shit. I'm the boss and I can say whatever I want and they have to take it. That ain't leadership material at that point. If that's a person's attitude, then maybe they need to go work by themselves, right? Because it's not kind and caring to other people. And ultimately, it's about other people, people first, right? So it's also spun off onto the concept of political intelligence, which comes into favor and out of favor now. Let's look at, if we're talking traits, and I talked about conscientiousness just a moment ago, right? The big 5 personality traits: extroversion, conscientiousness, open to new experience, agreeableness versus antagonism, neuroticism. The top 3 are actually better predictors of leadership ability than intelligence. So those people are outgoing and like to interact with people, who are conscientious and detail-oriented and open to doing things new ways, right, seem to have a leg up in this regard. Now, negatively associated traits: people are incompetent, lose respect quickly. People are rigid and inflexible, not a good. People are intemperate, that is given to anger displays and bad moods, bad attitudes. People are callous, who don't give a shit. People are corrupt. People are insular, that is, want to facilitate an us versus them mentality. And, dare we say it, people who are evil. These are negatively associated traits with leadership and don't get us down the path to high quality leadership. Right? Questions about that? Again, traits are important and people are sensitive to traits, but maybe this isn't the most predictive in the world. But the assignment I have coming up for you guys is going to leave you largely able to explore these and determine on the basis of your own data collection. Yes, there's going to be data collected. Now let's take the behavioral approaches. And the behavioral styles, the evolution, evolved from trait theory's lack of predictive power. So all these people are researching traits in the beginning, and it's not really yielding significant results in terms of empirical research. And so this is tied to the human relations theory as well. It determines behavior patterns and dimensions, right, that can be tied to work group effectiveness. So the idea here is what behaviors are exhibited rather than what traits can be measured. And we're going to go to Ohio State, and I know a lot of people don't know that Ohio State had a pretty strong industrial organizational psychology program. But decisions by the psychology department in the 90s kind of led to the expiration of Ohio State's presence in the IO world. They decided to go different directions. They decided to increase the money spent in social, the money spent in clinical. Neuroscience was on the horizon. So we saw counseling psychology disappear from Ohio State during this time, and we also saw industrial organizational psychology disappear at this time. Dr. Billings was the last IO faculty at Ohio State, and when he retired, for better or worse, you guys got stuck with me to teach this course, right? Once Billing left and the IO program disappeared, it was like, do we want to offer organizational psychology? And based on my background, they decided that they might take a shot with me, and we've been here ever since, right? So the Ohio State studies, and look at the size of the study, right? Identified two independent dimensions that have useful, meaningful level of explanatory power. And that is, one is consideration, creating mutual respect and trust with followers. Now notice, this is a behavior, but it captures a lot of the beneficial traits that we talked about in the previous section. And then initiating structure, which is organizing and defining what group members should be doing. And that is task orientation. To a certain extent, I don't know if some of you are sitting back and saying, well, you know what, this kind of sounds like leadership and management kind of combined. We've got the people aspect and the task aspect, and I wouldn't argue with you. There's not one best style, right? But follower satisfaction, motivation, performance are associated with these two dimensions. And how does it shake out then? Well, you can see then that in the first quadrant is low level of concern, right, towards employees, high level of concern towards the task. And then let's go to the opposite quadrant, number 3, high level of concern towards employees, but low level of concern for task. So we can see that this is somewhat context dependent, which style might be the best fit. And that's where we get to this kind of matrix here, the Ohio State Study Matrix Applied. And let's go to this upper one here is Country Club Management. This is thoughtful attention to the needs of the people for satisfying relationships leads to comfortable, friendly, organizational atmosphere and work tempo. So depending on the nature of the business, what we might see is beneficial, right, is a high concern for people, but a relatively low concern for production. Now, if you're in a paper mill, though, basically what you're talking about is we need the highest production at the lowest possible cost, because paper is paper and people buy on, first and foremost, price. So there we might see authority compliance. Efficiency in operation, totally important, right? From arranging conditions of work in such a way that human elements interfere to a minimum degree. And notice, I talked in the last lecture about best practices. So this is where we use people to determine what the best practice is, but from here on out, we train people in the best practice. So we don't allow for a lot of wild and woolly individualism. We say, look, this is the way the job is done, right? Now, we may engage in incremental continuous improvement, but we're not looking for a bunch of lone rangers to go out and fulfill their own workplace fantasies. We're looking for people who will fit the mold. And dare I say, and it's going to sound horrible, but with a good training program and a good personnel selection program, one person is probably as good as the next within a certain criteria. So notice my concern isn't to mistreat people, but it ain't people first, right? It's essentially process first. Let's go up here. Team management, work accomplishment from committed people, interdependence through a common stake, organization's purpose to lead, relationship of trust and respect. Right? So now we have a high concern for production, but at the same time, high concern for people. And then we can see middle road. So you can see how these might apply to different contexts. Questions? Okay. What can we do to increase leader effectiveness? Well, determine what needs to be done. And look at all the tools. We talked about brainstorming. We've talked about Pareto analysis. We've talked about flow charting. We've talked about run charts. We've talked about control charts. All of these are the tools, right, that allow us to determine scientifically what needs to be done. Determine the right thing to do for the entire enterprise. Develop comprehensive action plans. Take responsibility for decisions. Take responsibility, right? Communicate and inform in both directions. Upward and downward communication is facilitated. So is lateral communication. Focus on opportunities and not problems. Run productive meetings, or don't run meetings at all. We rather than I. Let's get rid of the I from the vocabulary. It's painful for the narcissistic among us, right? And then listen first, speak last. And that goes back to Tom Peters. What do you think? And you know what I think? I think this concludes part 1, and we'll go to part 2.